a powerful billionaire, an unforgiving judge, and a sensational trial. Will this con man really get away with it? This will blow over. It always does. Jonathan Sterling smirked contemptuously, his gaze sweeping over the crowd as if they were pawns on his chessboard. Ignoring the angry stares from his victims, Jonathan calmly leaned back in his chair. He was accustomed to controlling everything, from the stock market to corrupt politicians. But this time, there was a difference. Judge Eleanor Vance. She was not someone who could be bought or intimidated. Would justice be served, and would the evildoer be punished? Leave a comment and share your thoughts with everyone. The courtroom buzzed with a restless hum, tension thick in the air. People packed the benches, shoulder to shoulder, their eyes darting towards the defendant's table. Whispers spread from mouth to mouth, each rumor more scandalous than the last. Then he entered, tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in a charcoal gray designer suit, the man exuding an aura of arrogant confidence. His slicked back hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and he smirked at the crowd as if they had gathered to admire him. Not judge him. Jonathan Sterling, the name that had dominated headlines for weeks, looked more like a guest of honor than a defendant accused of embezzling millions from struggling families. But it wasn't his entrance that captured attention. It was what happened when Judge Eleanor Vance entered the courtroom. Dressed in her black robe, Judge Vance moved with quiet authority as she approached the bench. She didn't need to raise her voice or glance at the crowd to command respect. Her mere presence sufficed. Her reputation preceded her, a no-nonsense judge who valued justice above all else. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance," the bailiff announced. And everyone stood. Everyone, that is, except Jonathan Sterling. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to the defendant, who remained seated, casually flipping through a legal pad as if the proceedings were a trivial inconvenience. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Jonathan waved him off. Judge Vance paused at her bench, her gaze sharp. The silence grew heavier with each passing second. A murmur rippled through the crowd, disbelief palpable. Who does he think he is? But Jonathan remained unfazed, his expression smug, almost daring the judge to react. "You may be seated," Judge Vance said, her voice calm but firm. She didn't address the slight, not yet, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The tension was now not just palpable but suffocating. But this was only the beginning. Jonathan Sterling was about to learn a harsh lesson. Even the wealthiest and most powerful are not above the law. Jonathan Sterling was no mere wealthy man. He was an oligarch, luxury yachts, multi-million-dollar mansions on both coasts, private jets, and parties that rivaled celebrity galas. His business empire, Sterling Investments, was once hailed as a beacon of financial success. But behind the glitz and glamour lay a darker truth. Jonathan's rise to the top was built on deception, promising small business owners and middle-class families a chance to secure their futures. He convinced hundreds to invest their life savings in phantom projects, retirement accounts, college funds, even entire family inheritances, vanished in the blink of an eye. The fallout was devastating. Families lost their homes, parents struggled to feed their children, and elderly couples faced the terrifying prospect of living their final years in poverty. His greed created massive consequences. But to Jonathan, it was just business. When investigators caught up with him, the evidence was staggering: forged bank records, falsified documents, and testimony from former employees painted a damning picture. Yet even with the walls closing in, Jonathan remained confident. "I've got the best lawyers," he told reporters outside his Malibu mansion. "This will blow over. It always does." And for a while, it seemed he might be right. His legal team filed motion after motion, delaying the trial for months. They painted him as a misunderstood entrepreneur, a scapegoat for others' failures. But no amount of legal maneuvering could erase the mountain of evidence or the heartbreak of his victims. By the time the trial finally began in San Francisco, the courtroom was packed daily, seeking justice, or at least some semblance of it. Among them was Emily Carter, a widowed mother of 3, who lost her home after investing with Jonathan. Her youngest daughter had to drop out of college. Sitting beside her was Robert Davies, a retired firefighter, who spent decades saving for retirement. only to end up living on the streets. Their stories and countless others were shared in gut-wrenching detail during the trial. Emily's voice broke as she described the day she realized she couldn't make the mortgage payment. "I begged them not to take my house," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But they didn't care. My kids had to sleep in the car for 2 weeks. Do you know what that feels like?" Robert's testimony was just as harrowing. "I spent 35 years running into burning buildings," he said, his voice heavy with anger. "And this man, he burned my future to the ground without a second thought." But through it all, Jonathan sat there, unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling on his phone or whispering jokes to his lawyer. To him, these were just stories, irrelevant noise that wouldn't change the outcome he believed was already in his favor. The press ate it up. Headlines screamed about his arrogance, the blatant disrespect he'd shown to the court. Public opinion was turning against him. But Jonathan didn't care. As far as he was concerned, public opinion didn't write checks. His lawyer tried to spin the narrative. "Mr. Jonathan Sterling deeply regrets the consequences he has caused," the lawyer said in a press conference. "But he remains confident that the truth will prevail." However, the truth was that Jonathan had no intention of admitting guilt. He was betting on the system bending the truth in his favor, as it always had before. But this time, there was one factor Jonathan hadn't accounted for. Judge Eleanor Vance was not like the people he was used to dealing with. The trial was a spectacle. News vans lined the streets outside the courthouse, reporters jostling for position to capture every detail. Inside, the tension only grew as the days dragged on. Witness after witness took the stand, each one adding another nail to Jonathan's metaphorical coffin. But it wasn't just the testimonies that drew gasps from the audience, it was Jonathan's behavior. On the third day of the trial, the prosecution presented damning evidence, a series of emails where Jonathan explicitly instructed his team to falsify records and mislead investors. The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor read his words aloud. "Make the numbers look good. We need these suckers to sign on the dotted line." The words hung in the air like poison. Emily Carter, sitting in the front row, shook her head in disbelief. Robert Davies clenched his fists. And Jonathan, he smirked. "Mr. Sterling, do you recognize this email?" the prosecutor asked, her voice sharp. His lawyer interjected before he could answer. "Objection. This question has been asked and answered in pretrial hearings." Judge Vance raised a hand, her expression calm but firm. "Overruled. The defendant will answer the question." Jonathan leaned into the microphone, his tone dripping with condescension. "Yes, I recognize it, but let's not pretend it means what you're implying. It's just business talk. You wouldn't understand." The crowd erupted in whispers, and the judge's gavel struck like thunder. "Order," Judge Vance commanded, her voice cutting through the noise. She turned her attention back to Jonathan. "Mr. Sterling, I advise you to watch your tone. This is not a boardroom meeting." But Jonathan remained unfazed. He seemed amused, as if this were all an elaborate game. As the trial continued, his arrogance only grew. He interrupted witnesses with sarcastic chuckles, rolled his eyes during cross-examinations, and whispered loudly to his lawyer during key moments. The audience watched in disbelief as he treated the courtroom like his personal stage. Then came the day Lana testified. She stepped up to the stand, clutching a folded piece of paper in trembling hands. Her voice was shaky as she began, but her words carried the weight of her pain. "I trusted him," she said, looking directly at Jonathan. "I trusted him with everything I had, and he destroyed my family's future." Jonathan didn't even look at her. He leaned back in his chair, casually scrolling on his phone. "Your Honor," the prosecutor interrupted, pointing towards Jonathan. "The defendant is clearly not paying attention to the witness." All eyes turned to Judge Vance, her face impassive, but her eyes burned with quiet fury. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice measured, "put your phone away now." Jonathan glanced up, unfazed. "I was just checking something important," he said, holding up the device as if to prove his point. The judge's tone hardened. "I said now." For a moment, it seemed like he might argue. But then reluctantly, he set the phone down. Lana's testimony continued, but her voice carried a tremor. By the end of her statement, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, except for Jonathan's. The prosecution rested its case a week later. leaving the defense to make their move. Jonathan's lawyer tried everything, discrediting witnesses, twisting the narrative, even painting Jonathan as a victim of overzealous prosecutors. But the cracks were too big to cover. Throughout it all, Judge Vance maintained her composure. She rarely spoke, but her presence loomed over the room like a steady, unwavering force. But it was clear to everyone watching that her patience with Jonathan's antics was wearing thin. The trial had reached its final day, the courtroom air electric with tension, the anticipation almost unbearable. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised and cameras ready. The gallery was packed with victims, their faces a mix of anger and hope. All eyes were on Judge Eleanor Vance as she prepared to deliver the sentence. Jonathan Sterling sat at the defense table, his posture as relaxed as ever. He even had the audacity to flash a small grin at the cameras as they captured his every move. He didn't look like a man about to face judgment, he looked like a man convinced he had already won. When Judge Vance finally spoke, the courtroom fell silent. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice steady and deliberate, "you have been found guilty on all counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the testimonies of your victims paint a clear picture of your actions. You manipulated, exploited, and destroyed the lives of countless people, all for personal gain." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. The judge continued, "Throughout this trial, you have shown a blatant lack of remorse. Your behavior in this courtroom has been utterly disgraceful. You have insulted your victims, disregarded this court's authority, and treated these proceedings as if they were beneath you." The crowd murmured in agreement. Lana, sitting in the front row, clasped her hands tightly, her knuckles white. Judge Vance's tone shifted, becoming colder. "Justice, Mr. Sterling, is not about wealth, power, or privilege. It is about accountability. And today, you will face the consequences of your actions." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the faint rustling of papers. "Therefore," the judge declared, "I sentence you to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Jonathan's face froze, turning ashen. 25 years? He had expected a mere slap on the wrist, maybe a few months in a comfortable facility. But this was unprecedented for someone of his stature. Judge Vance wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate liquidation of your assets to repay the victims of your crimes. Every dollar you stole will be returned to the families you devastated." The courtroom erupted in stunned murmurs. Lana brought her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Robert Davies leaned back in his seat, his eyes wide with disbelief. Jonathan shot up from his chair, his face flushed with anger. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "I am Jonathan Sterling." Judge Vance slammed her gavel down, her expression unyielding. "Mr. Sterling, sit down." But Jonathan wasn't finished. "This is outrageous. I will appeal this. I will ruin your career." The bailiffs moved closer, ready to intervene. Judge Vance remained calm, her voice cutting through his outburst like a knife. "This is my courtroom, Mr. Sterling. Bailiffs, escort the defendant out." As he was led away, Jonathan continued to protest, his voice growing fainter with each step. The courtroom erupted in applause. A rare occurrence, but one that felt entirely fitting in this moment. Judge Vance turned to the audience, her expression softening slightly. "Justice has been served," she said. "Let this be a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." The story of Jonathan Sterling serves as a stark reminder of the power of justice. No matter how wealthy and powerful, he still had to pay the price for his fraudulent actions and contempt for the law. This trial affirms that truth and fairness will always prevail, while also illustrating the consequences of arrogance and greed. This story also brings hope, as the victims found the strength to recover and put their trust in justice. What are your thoughts on the ending of this story? Was justice served fully? Share your feelings and thoughts by leaving a comment below. Let's spread this story together. A powerful reminder of the strength of justice, so that those who intend to manipulate the law will tremble before punishment.